Hey, curious cuties. Welcome to Curio City. Today, we're diving into the extraordinary world of Deborah Anderson, renowned fashion visionary and award-winning filmmaker. From Belle Aura, adorned by global influencers, to the vibrant landscapes of Peru that sparked the creation of WYLDSAGE, Deborah's evolution in the world of creativity is nothing short of inspiring. However, the spotlight shines brightest on her latest venture, the groundbreaking documentary Women of the White Buffalo. We unravel the mysteries behind the film, exploring its deep connections to indigenous cultures. With exclusive insights from Deborah, we delve into the challenges faced during the film's production and the call to action that makes this documentary more than just a cinematic experience. Discover the power of storytelling, the resilience of indigenous communities, and the transformative potential of art. Please help me welcome Deborah Anderson. Something that I loved learning about your story is that you are very multifaceted. You've had you kind of talk about your photography era, like you just kind of said that. And you also did music, growing up. So I was like, there's a lot that actually you and I relate on. I started in music as well. And I don't do photography like you do, but I do photography as well in Nashville, and it's part of what pays my bills. But this is my main thing is my podcast. But as I mentioned before, I also am a screenwriter, and I did the Missing Matoka project. So being multifaceted, I'm well versed into that lifestyle.
Yeah, it's about being a Renaissance woman. We were just discussing this yesterday. I did this beautiful talk with this woman, Felicia, who is a curandera, and she works with plant medicine and food. Food is one of her big healing modems. And we were talking about how she started in the business of being seen out in public and pushing her brand. She was known as a curandera in the kitchen. And ultimately, she has so many other facets, so many other parts of her being that she hasn't expressed. And now finally, she's starting to step into that feeling that I know who I am and I want to be all things. And I think if there's anything to speak to, it's about really giving ourselves permission to be all things. And I fought that for so many years because, I definitely am so many things. Doing photography is just one facet of the many things that interest me. But because we live in a society that is really, you go to school, you're asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then you get given this moment where you're like, oh, must make a decision to become something. And then you start to take on the role of I will become this. And you study for that and you become that, and you get very compartmentalized. You get put into that box of being the one thing. And the idea that you could be many things, well, then immediately it's so, what is it? What's the saying about master of none when you do too many things?
Oh, jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah. See, I didn't retain it because I don't believe in that. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Didn't retain that bit of information. Yeah. So I think that this is a time for us to reclaim all parts of who we are.
Oh, I love that. I mean, truly, you're preaching to the choir. Actually, our listeners are called Curious Cuties, and a lot of them kind of fall into that sort of lifestyle, that category, if you will, that Renaissance woman, the master of actually many things. And I've talked about that personally. Other guests who've been on are also very multifaceted, and having accolades even in so many different arenas of either, the different industries, whether it's, photography or film or music or business or there's just so many things. And, it's truly refreshing to hear you and others saying, yeah, I do a lot of things, so what? And Allison and I actually talked about that in the episode that I did with her. However, that was just a side conversation that she and I had. And I asked her how she puts all of it together. I'm like, how do you put it all together seamlessly, all the things that you do and are, whatever. And she's like, what do you mean? She didn't even know how to answer the question because she's like, oh, I don't. I just do all these things. I don't try to like make it some picture of like, oh, I am this thing. And personally, that's something that I have struggled with. I've wanted to, I think I grew up more in the era of Facebook bios and Instagram bios and MySpace and things like that, where it's like, okay, you say who you are, what you are, like this is how people see you and, interpret you. And I genuinely love hearing perspective like you have and like Alice has. It's just kind of like, oh, it's just all the parts that make up who I am and the passions I'm into in this current moment.
Agreed. And let's say why, if we were to ask the question, why should we only be one thing? Mm-hmm. We can do so many things.
What's the point?
Like, I know I love to cook. And I always tease, my friends come for dinner and I'm like, I should open a restaurant because I just love to create the alchemy in the kitchen. I think there's a deep connection to our past lives, all the different things that we've done in our past lives. I think there's something about when you come into each life, you have remembrances of something else that you've done, you've been, you've experienced, and it echoes through the system in this specific life. And I definitely know that the many lives that I have lived is what it feels like to me. It's the only way I can explain it.
Totally.
I'm sure there are some listeners who may not believe in past lives. I wonder why is it when you meet somebody, you have this feeling of familiarity? Why is it that when you're doing something that seems new, never done this before, but yet it feels so effortless? What does that really feel like in the body? Like, how does that really feel? So I think I'm stepping into how does it feel? And if it feels good, then I want to do it. I want to express it. And if it can make me money and it can help support me, thank God, even better, Right. However, I think sometimes, and I spoke to Alice about this too, trying to make it in a certain arena, trying to be an actress or trying to be the photographer or the filmmaker, and it not possibly working out the way that you'd like it to. And I always say then maybe that's not for you. But yet when you have such a passion for something that you love so much, you want it to work. And yet there's something about a not flowing thing that feels like, okay, this is probably why I'm not making the kind of money or the revenue that I really want to make from this thing that I love. And so you step into something new and suddenly it's like, boom, it happens. It just starts to roll. And so there's something in that too. How I've discovered any of the things that I'm good at is because the thing I was doing wasn't quite flowing. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do next? Because there's a survival mechanism piece around it. And now I think as I've gotten older, I just realized, no, it's okay to be all things. And the more that you're centered in the knowing of who you are, I think the flow becomes easier.
So good. Yeah, it always resonates with me anytime I hear something like that. So thank you for sharing that. And yeah, so I was catching up on all things that you are and all things that you have done in your different eras of your life. And one of the things that I see that you are really pouring your heart into right now is WYLDSAGE. So could you kind of tell us a little bit about that and what was the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, WYLDSAGE is a lifestyle for sure. It's a brand that was really born out of a trip where I went to Peru. I went with a dear friend, Violeta Villacorta, who I met in Idlewild when I was living in California up in the mountains. And she lives in Peru and she said, come visit a year ago. So I went and I was just blown away. I was blown away by not only the culture and the people, but the land. The land holds so much magic, so much wisdom. I went to Machu Picchu. There was something going on politically. So they put out some sort of warning signs. Don't travel, don't come to Peru. There's so many problems with the people, unrest, blah, blah, blah. I get this. So there's no tourists. So I'm standing on Machu Picchu and there must have been 80 people on the entire mountain. And normally they say they have between 3,000 and 4,000 people a day visit this mountain. And so the sacred land, I should say. I mean, you are right on the top. You're in the middle of the Andes. It is the most incredible feeling. I was still in awe for days after that. And especially with nobody there, I got to really be submerged in the energy of the place. So she's a fashion designer, has been for many years. She had a beautiful seamstress, and I said, well, maybe I should make some pieces. I've been an avid lover of clothes, fashion. I did have a clothing line 20 years ago. I was living in Paris. It was called Belle Aura. And then it was, I renamed it then to my own name, Deborah Anderson. I sold to Barney's. I sold to Maria Louisa in Paris, Harrods in London. I had about 26 stores. And then September the 11th happened, and it ruined my business. I was a very small business. So all my stores in the Americas, they canceled all their orders, and I was left with a lot of clothes that I couldn't get rid of. And I was very new, and I didn't have a big company behind me, and I just said, I will never do this again. It just broke me. So I got into photography and other things, and this is kind of like a full circle where I hadn't really completed that story. So I make these clothes. I come back to Los Angeles, New York, and Barbados. I do these trips, and I sell these pieces to various friends, and I realized that I had something that felt more than just a clothing line, that when the women put them on, they're like, oh my God, these are the most beautiful, most comfortable. There's just something, I'd see people light up. There's just something about the frequency of the fabric. It's 100% linen. And then what I really saw was this embodiment piece. And I just went, oh, these clothes are about standing in your truth, feeling good in your skin, feeling confident. This embodiment piece just felt very, it felt like it had a story outside of, oh, I've got a clothing brand.
Yeah.
And so I launched it out into the world back in September. So it's only been about 6 months, and it's been a journey. It's been a journey just trying to figure out who is the WYLDSAGE woman and what am I really saying? What is the purpose of this? Because let me tell you, there are enough clothes on this planet. We don't need any more clothes. But there's something about, there's a remembrance piece around this clothing line. So for me now, it feels like WYLDSAGE is becoming a lifestyle brand.
I love that. It's very all encompassed that way. And I feel like the heart is felt through that, you know, whenever something has that, whenever the owner, the person who's involved, like feels that deep connection, I feel like that embodiment is felt within the clothes, because you're so involved and it means so much to you. So I really think that it will be transformative to any person who tries it on and collects your items because your heart is there. So well,
they're made by women. That. They're made by women for women. They're all handmade. They're all hand dyed. So every piece has a unique color to it. So there's just something. It's not. This is slow fashion. So there's something about more of an heirloom, a collectible piece.
Yes.
And yet they're still affordable. So, yeah.
I love that. And you talked about, so years ago you had, was it Belle Aura? And then you changed it to your name. That's amazing, the success that you had back then. And then I understand like the tragic events that happened at, 9/11. And that's incredible that you're able to, in a way, not close the circle because that sounds like you're now done, but like bring it back full circle. Are there any things or any experiences from that time, during Belle Aura that kind of influenced your approach to fashion, and maybe tell us like how it influences your work with WYLDSAGE now?
Yes. Slow down is the big message. Is I think I was trying to build the company the last time way too fast. Got very excited. Yeah. I was selling to so many wonderful stores. And you just suddenly imagine this possibility that it can become all things. And so you start designing too many pieces. You've got too much to hold. And I would just say this time round, I have 9 dresses in the collection. And I have 1 coat made out of alpaca. And then I have some accessories, but very simple. And I want to continue doing the same shapes in just different colors for a couple of years. So to me, it's about really slowing down, breathing into what is the story, who are the women, who wants to wear your clothes, and just to really build the audience in a different way. So even though I am looking for stores to carry the line, I think I'm being a little more cautious as to who, how big, how many pieces can I actually make, especially if they're made by hand and they're hand dyed. So I think the approach is just to really take my time, ask for advice. I have a wonderful mentor, a dear friend of mine, Lekha Singh, who from the beginning saw the possibility, and she said, okay, how does this look for the next 5 years? And I'm like, 5 years? She's like, well, yeah, you have to have this sort of growing piece around, wanting it to have the success. And I said, yeah, you're right. So we did a 3-year plan. And I'm, like I said, I'm 6 months in. And so it takes a while. So patience and really building your audience. I think that's the piece for me at this time. What is your story? What is the purpose? And so the why. Why are we making these clothes? And why will having a piece make a difference in your life? So slowing it down.
And so for anyone who wants to make a purchase, what is that besides the embodiment? Or maybe that's it. What would you want their why to be?
Because why do we need more clothes, right? I would say it's something, to me, it feels, the idea to buy a piece of clothing that you really will wear a lot. And the more you wash, the softer it becomes and just feels so good in. And that it was handmade and that it's had hands touching the fabric and it's not in the fast fashion energy field. It is definitely something that just makes you feel like you're connected to the garment, So I think there's something about, wanting to be a part of the story, supporting the women that make these clothing in Peru and gifting them the support by way of buying the pieces. And just weaving your own story because you will be wearing a unique, one-of-a-kind piece that nobody else will be wearing.
Love. I can't wait to make my purchase.
Well, you go to WYLDSAGE. If you go to the WYLDSAGE website, WYLDSAGE, and it really stands for the wild woman who has the knowing and is connected to her truth. And is embodied, and has the sage energy in her. I feel like it's a line for women whose body shapes have changed, that we're not, in our 20s, maybe 30s, where we have a certain feeling and body shape. This is moving into your 40s and 50s and how you want to feel comfortable and you don't want to be in tight clothing and yet you still want to feel feminine and sexy and beautiful.
Oh, I love that. It's everything I love. I live for comfort, but like luxe, like feeling luxe and comfort. That's, if I could just dress and feel like that every day, then I'm living my best life. Yeah,
it's addictive. Trust me. I take hikes with the dog, and my friends are like, really though? And I've got my hat on, I've got the dress on, I've got the alpaca. I'm like, this is me every day. This isn't. I don't just dress up to be a dinner or to go out, to an event. It's an everyday thing. I think that's the other piece is really, we get very stuck on wearing, well, I've seen it, I don't, workout gear. People are running around LA. I think there was a moment that it was really just, I don't think anybody was going to the gym. And we get we get so disconnected from that feminine piece within us because we're wearing these workout clothes or, big sweats or the jeans or whatever. It becomes a uniform. And there's something that really separates us from our divine feminine because of that. So when I've seen the women throw on one of these dresses and suddenly they start floating and spinning, I'm going, that's exactly it. That's exactly
You're
it.
like, aha, that's the sparkle. Yep. I totally love that. Oh my gosh. Great. Okay. Well, I want to transition a little bit from fashion to film. So I do want to talk a little bit about the documentary, Women of the White Buffalo. So for the listeners, can you tell us what is Women of the White Buffalo and what is your involvement with it?
Women of the White Buffalo is a feature documentary film and really was a passion piece for me on all levels to get to sit with the Lakota tribe, with the women, to sit with the elders, to sit in ceremony, to go into sweat, and to be really held by the hand was a dream come true. Like you never expect that you'll get an opportunity to sit within a community in this way and be brought in by an elder. And she held my hand, Carol Einra Pereira, who has since passed since I made the film. I was living in Idlewild, I went down to have my camera fixed. I'm a Leica photographer and ambassador for the brand, and have done many shows now with them with this project, Women of the White Buffalo. And they asked me, would I like to do a show and what would that look like? And you kind of get to that point in your career as a photographer. I was like, wow, finally I get to show my work with Leica. And Leica being the premier storytelling brand, really, of photography and cameras globally. And I thought, what is the story that I want to tell? How do I step beyond what I've been doing for so many years, where I was photographing various icons, musicians, singer-songwriters, whether it be Pink for her album covers or Elton John, making other books, more erotic work I did when I was living in Paris for the book Paper Thin, and then doing a year in a hotel, the life of what happens in this hotel room, with a book called Room 23. And I was shooting Heidi Klum, George Clooney, a plethora of amazing people, Sharon Stone, all in this hotel room. To then moving into doing hotel interior photography with the Gansevoort Hotel Group in New York, and creating artwork at a huge scale. There was just something that felt was missing from what I was doing. Like, it just felt like I hadn't done the work I was really meant to do, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And yet during that period, I got to really learn light and understand composition and storytelling because of all the other work that I'd gotten to do. And so the opportunity to want to get involved in making a film about a tribe that has suffered so much over the 535 years of genocide and story that they have gone through. It was, to me, it was like, how is this even possible that I could even do this, let alone be invited in by the community to tell their stories? So by way of a woman who had gone onto the reservation several years in the making, she'd made these connections, Kumiko Hayashi, she came in and said to me, these people have been waiting. When I'd reached out to her through a mutual friend that is very much connected to the indigenous communities here in America, she said, I know somebody who is a filmmaker and maybe she can help. And so when I reached out to Kumiko, she said, I've been going to Pine Ridge Reservation, which is the poorest reservation, poorest county really in America. She said, I have some connections there. Maybe we can reach out and see if they're interested in sharing their story. Well, it happened super quick. Within 2 weeks, I got my first donation. The whole film was made by donation. Nobody gave me money to make money from the film. I didn't have any big production company coming behind me saying, we'll give you the money, but we want it all back and we want profit, et cetera, et cetera. You don't make money from making documentary films. That isn't why one makes a documentary, and it definitely doesn't yield an income at the end. That's why it's really a passion piece. Like, if you're going to put your heart into something like this, you just have to know you're doing it for all the right reasons. You're doing it because you want to share a story. You want to wake people up. You want to expand on people's understanding around a community, a situation, or whatever it may be, your story or subject. So within 2 weeks, I was talking with Carol Einrup Herrera, and she said, we've been waiting for you. When are you coming? And I couldn't have imagined myself stepping into that world in the way that I did. I felt very supported. There was a very small team. There was only 5 of us. And I went for a couple of weeks, got to meet all the different women that Carol had introduced me to. And then my team showed up and we spent another month, and then we went back again. Once I'd gathered all the stories and I looked through everything, I worked with my writing partner, Charlotte Chatton, who's an old dear friend of mine. And we said, what do we have? What are the main topics that we need to speak to? What's the most important subject, and how is this going to help anybody? I think that was the big thing. If you're going to make a film about anybody that isn't your people, I'm indigenous to the Caribbean. I'm not indigenous to the Lakota people. And yet I felt a kinship. I felt a deep connection to them as a culture, as a people. Their language, I felt, was something I'd heard before. There was just something that resonated so deeply for me. And Carol, like she said, we've been waiting for you because we want our story to be told. And she really held my hand throughout the whole process, And I saw in my dream, in my meditation prior to going out, that I needed to find the age group would be between 9 and 90, something like this. It would be women that could speak to all the different situations, what it is to be a school teacher, what it is to come from a family of alcoholism, what it is to be a meth addict or survivor of missing indigenous peoples. There were so many different stories to tap into. So I found myself wanting to find the best, or an expert, let's say, someone that understood that story. And so the whole of the film becomes all of these women's stories that creates the whole story for the experience of what it is to be a modern day Native American Indian living on the poorest reservation here in America.
I love that. So we talked a little bit before we jumped on the call. I have a similar project that I worked on, and it is the Missing Matoaka project, and it's a call for action, especially targeting missing and murdered Indigenous women, because I told the real story of Pocahontas, that it's an audio that goes over top of the movie Pocahontas, but told correctly. And so it's something that obviously I'm very passionate about. I'm very passionate about telling the truth of Indigenous people, and course correcting history. And I obviously can know that within your project and within the documentary, the women being able to share their truth is so potent, because there's so much of current information right now that is even incorrect, that we're still trying to course correct. So being able to, on my side of things, in a way, correct the past. And with your documentary, you're getting current conversations and stories of women today, I think is a beautiful testament of the action that we're taking now, the passion that's been rising since I would say the mid 90s for Native American stories and lives to be heard, and to be their voices to be lifted up. And so I really do appreciate the work that you've done, and especially, being not Indigenous to the Americas. I'm not Pocahontas's tribe. I'm Ojibwe. But it still is I'm passionate because I'm an Indigenous woman, and you're Indigenous as well, but to a different land. But you said you can resonate with the women in that way, that you have this home base. So I very much just want to say I appreciate so much your work and everything that you've done, especially for those who aren't necessarily your people, quote unquote. I have a lot of respect for that.
Thank you. I mean, the thing that I learned along the journey, right, was the remembrance of where do I come from? Who are my people? And the Taino and Carib Indian people that I met along the way, that I would sit with and speak to, and they all, they high cheekbones and the freckles all look like my grandfather. So my grandfather is from the West Indies. He's West Indian, Caribbean, Indian. I realized that the real history of the Americas, the Caribbean was part of the Americas. So we were all Indigenous.
True.
In that way, right? And then it's all been cut up, and everybody's been sort of placed into specific areas within America and South America. It's like you speak to people who are from Mexico, and I ask them, where are you from? And they're like, I'm Mexican. I'm like, that face is not Mexican per se. I can see there's something definitely South American, but what tribe? Who was your grandmother? Who was your grandfather? They don't know. So we're speaking about a very disconnected society, right? Of people who have no clue where they really come from. The Lakota are very clear. They're Lakota. The Navajo, very clear. They're Navajo. Your tribe, your people. I spoke yesterday with a beautiful woman who's Pueblo. We have, but she's also got a lot of Mexican, South American blood. And when I first went to sit with the Lakota, they asked me what tribe was I from. they recognized that I wasn't, even though I opened my mouth, I have a British accent, and they were then very confused. And I said, don't worry. I said, I'm confused half the time as well. I'm like, where am I from? Yet the history says, that I have the indigenous blood of the Caribbean, which, like I said, it was one continent. The Americas, the South America, this was all one continent. And then Barbados, where I grew up, was the biggest slave trade hub in the Caribbean Antilles. We're talking about the West Africans coming in and the British creating that society with the slaves. And then, of course, it trickled into the Americas. So I have West African blood as well. So my ancestral understanding that I know of has the stories of the slavery, and it also has the stories of the indigenous peoples being squashed, quietened, killed, used as slaves and such as well. And I don't know fully my lineage beyond my great-great-grandfather. I know my sister's trying to do a little bit of homework around that when it comes to the islands, because there's so much displacement. And when you go to Barbados, there's every color of black you can imagine. There's every color of brown that you can imagine. So there's a big African energy on the island. So I have that in my blood as well as the Carib Indian. So going to sit with the Lakota people, and then I sat with many different tribes as I showed the film, I didn't feel like an outsider, even though there's some that would want to say, well, you're not native to this land. What does that mean? Not native to this land? It's like, most people are not native to this land. They've all come from Europe, so there is such a mixture of understanding around what it means to be indigenous. And I think if anything, I really sat with the idea that we are all indigenous to a place, and that I was welcomed in to tell the story because I could, because I knew what I felt I knew what I was doing. And what I got out of the experience was that I got it right. I listened. I really allowed them to tell me their story. I didn't come in to farm their stories. I was held, trust me, I was held many a time accountable for any of my actions. If I stood outside of how I should be doing this and, on Facebook or on Instagram speaking about them. And, I was reprimanded. I had the gatekeepers. I was definitely being watched. This wasn't, and the best was actually, to be honest with you, is that I didn't realize how big of a subject I'd taken on until the day it came out. And then I felt hungover the day it came out into the world. It's literally, I felt hungover for 2 days. I felt like I'd been out all night, and I don't drink, and that's not really the way that I conduct myself, but I just felt exhausted. Like the weight of this story was so immense. And then when I did put it out into the world, the first thing I got was the approval of the Lakota people, and they played it for their children at school, and they saw it as an opportunity to educate. And that's when I knew that the grandmas and Carol Einrip Herrera and Marie Brushbreaker, who was 98 when I interviewed her, or 97, I think, when I interviewed her, that their wisdom and their voice comes through in this film. It's not mine.
Absolutely. You said you felt hungover, like that exhaustion. I can't help but feel like perhaps yes, you realize how powerful this project was and is. Was there negative feedback? You said there were gatekeepers, there were people who were, what you were reprimanded. What did that look like? Was that from like Native people, or were that from like social justice warriors saying like, what are you doing? This isn't your place.
No, it was the Lakota people, Native people. Okay. They, at first, not knowing anything about who I am, when I first on the onset was out there doing it, it was like, oh, that British woman is here. And it wasn't an acknowledgement of my own ancestral roots. And then it became, shh, Indians talking. Shh, we don't want to hear from you. And then it just started to become a little bit comical, because I thought, do they think I'm a white woman trying to tell the story? Because that would have made a difference. Just because I have a British accent, I went to school in England. I grew up in the Caribbean. And my ancestors, like I said, of Carib, Indian, Taino, and West African heritage. And then on my dad's side, I have Scottish and Irish, very Irish gypsy blood do I have. You know, and I know and I feel this in my veins. Like, I know this is who I am. And so when I started to see that some of the backlash was out of fear, that who did I think I was, or that I would get it wrong, I just kept praying. I kept praying. And Carol would call me and she would pray with me. And I would speak to all of the women all the time. I was in communication with the women who were in the film all the time. And I would check in. And then when I finished the film, the first iteration, the first edit, I took it back to the people and I said, I want to show you what I have so far. And you're not really meant to do these things, you know, as a documentary filmmaker, you're meant to go in, get the story, leave, edit, and then, you know, throw it out into the world. This just felt so different. This felt like this was their story. I had the means to be able to tell it. I had some backing. I had some financial backing that was gifted to me to be able to make the film. So I trusted that process. I was going to do it that way. That's how I wanted to do it. So slowly the naysayers started to fall by the wayside. And, you know, I would have someone come up to me at one of the screenings and he's like, what are you doing? What is this? Like checking me out, like checking in. And I'd see him. I'd be like, oh, you're a gatekeeper. Well, no, that my heart is all about sharing these stories because the wisdom is what is going to heal this planet. And it's time to wake up. And if we forget these stories and if we kill the indigenous peoples, I say we, the grand we, but people, we will not survive what is coming. We have to remember her. We have to remember the land. We have to remember Mother. We have to remember who we are. And when I say that, when I say, you know, remember who we are, is remember where we came from, who we're connected to, how every day we walk out in the world, like how we are holding ourselves, what truth are we sitting in? And so when I started to learn more and more about the murdered and missing indigenous women, I had this vision. This is right at the beginning. This was, so now like 6 years ago. I saw this vision of a woman with the red handprint on her mouth. And I searched the internet for this picture. I saw it in my dream. I looked. I couldn't find a photo of a woman with this red handprint. And so I created it with Delasina Chief Eagle, who's one of the women featured in the film. And I said, I see this image. I see this, the red handprint. I see this red tear, a blood tear. And I see the red handprint on the back of a woman. I said, can we create those three images? I see them so clearly. So we created them and I put out I had not finished the film. We were still filming actually. And I put out the image of the red handprint on Delasina on our Facebook page and it went viral. And I started to get a ton of requests from other indigenous women saying, can I use that photo? And I said, it doesn't belong to me. It's definitely in the zeitgeist. It's definitely part of what's happening. I guess I had an opportunity to create something and I put it out there. And it was like an instant thing where suddenly it was everywhere. That it became the poster child, that image of the red handprint on the face of the indigenous women for the murdered and missing indigenous women movement. And I just felt so honored and so humbled that I was a part of that I got to bring that into the world. And then I've seen it everywhere. And it's just exciting to know that a vision like that can make a difference. It can really change people's perspective and understanding, and it can educate. And then I changed my version to the image of the American flag, because in my mind, I believe that the indigenous peoples of America are in distress, and it's upside down, the flag, which means it's a distress call. And then, of course, on the mouths of the indigenous people.
And I commend you for being so brave, and even with the people who kept checking you. I know that's hard. I think now more than ever, though, we have to be brave enough to investigate the stories, especially because there's so much we can do with course correcting history. Like I was saying, I really commend you for continuing and using your momentum to keep going, to tell the truth. And I could see, I can understand why they were hesitant. You know, our stories have been completely twisted and told wrong for years, for I mean, that's over 400 years ago. So it's been years and years and years and years of pain of someone telling our stories incorrectly. And it has kept a lot of indigenous communities feeling like they need to keep themselves private and keep their sacred stories sacred. And I understand there's a good reason why. And on top of that, a lot of our family, our stories had almost been lost. Residential schools. Personally, my grandfather was in a residential school. My great grandmother, and my grandfather eventually got away, not before he was abused like crazy and starved and all this. And so their stories as well have been. They were abused when they used their language. They were abused when they spoke their stories. So there's been so much of our lives and our ancestors' history and lived experience that keeps our stories feeling very, very vulnerable and very sacred. So I can understand why they were hesitant, but I do commend you for pressing on and keeping on, knowing that it really is that important. And I resonate as well when you're talking about you have like a mixed lineage. So I'm mixed. So my dad is Ojibwe, and also I'm Mexican indigenous. So kind of like what you're talking about. So I'm Otomi, and I don't have status there because that tribe is essentially like wiped out. So there's not a lot of record, which is why I do talk a lot about being Ojibwe, because I have status there. I have family there. It's like still, an ongoing living tribe. And I'm really grateful, but the Mexican indigenous side of me is like harder to know much about because essentially they were wiped out. And then my mother, so I'm also, my white side is Scottish. So something we relate on. But yeah, so I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit more like information on me. And again, commend you for pressing on with that story, because it's important, but a lot of people are scared, both on the investigating side of it. They're scared. And then also on the telling the stories side, I understand why indigenous people are scared to even tell their stories.
Well, I think it's about how they're held. I think the big piece around them not wanting to just be like, go for it, do the thing. They've had so many people come and farm their stories and take what they want from it, take what they want from the people. They're just over it. It's like they're just done. Yeah. It's like, you have raped us, you have pillaged us. And so to go in and say, this will be your story told by you from your point of view. And my job as a filmmaker is to make it make sense so that it's palatable for an audience to sit through an hour and 26 minutes and not want to leave their seats, And so, because, your family being Ojibwe, we have 820 tribes, I think, in America, something like that. There's 754 tribes that are recognized. No, sorry, 543 tribes are recognized in America. And there's another 200 tribes trying to be recognized. So you're looking at, and then there are more that don't care. And I'm not saying that there's thousands and thousands of people in each tribe, right? There aren't that many people, but there are these tribes. We're talking over 800 tribes in America alone that have their own language, their own way of praying, their own understanding, their own way of being. That we don't talk about that. 800 tribes in America. That's, so, and when you speak to not knowing much about the South American part of your lineage, again, there are thousands of tribes that are not spoken about. So there's this lost language, this lost understanding that every day is just languages are being lost. I think somebody said that, I read somewhere that every a month there's another language that's disappearing on this planet. And so the other piece that I learned being with the Lakota people about their language is it holds a medicine, and it would change throughout the years because it was a living, breathing thing. And I just loved that, the idea that it just becomes this ever evolving language. And I do believe 10 years ago, maybe there were 20,000 people that could speak Lakota. And now there's only, I don't know, 1,800, something like this, 2,000 people that speak the Lakota language. So all of these pieces are being lost. And so to get an opportunity to tell that story, which we speak about the history, we speak about the boarding schools, we speak about the meth addiction on the reservation, we speak about the children committing suicide and the high rates of suicide. It's just, they wanted to be heard. They wanted to be heard. I think we all want to be heard on some level, you know, we want to be seen and heard. And that was really why when they saw me and they understood my intention and they spent some time with me, I was invited in very quickly. Carol Einrope made me a sister, you know, she brought me in as family. And so when she introduced me to all the different tribes people in the first, I think, weekend of my being there, she introduced me as a family member, as a sister. And she gifted me these beautiful earrings. They were Dreamcatcher earrings that she had made and then gifted to me as a way of welcoming me into her family, into the fold. But by her doing that, that was her basically saying, you will trust her. But they brought me into council. They brought me in to stand in circle with all the elders. They asked me, why am I here? And I'm sitting in a trailer in the middle of minus 20 degree weather in the snow with a small little fire that they had going, and everybody's wearing these big puffer jackets. And if you closed your eyes and you hear the sound of the water drum and the singing and the ceremony before I spoke, you would be transported back to being in a teepee, to being in ceremony when a foreigner, a stranger would enter into their camp and they would say, why are you here? And that was what they did with me. I was petrified.
I bet.
I was petrified. And then to be able to speak to my own lineage, they said, oh, you're an original. And that was, in a way, that was the acceptance. I may have this accent, but my roots come from the original Indians, the Caribbean Indians, and the indigenous Africans, you know, and the indigenous Irish, and the indigenous warriors of the Scots.
Hey cuties, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Deborah. Our conversation was cut a bit short due to technical difficulties, but that doesn't take away from the amazing conversation that you already heard. And I do urge you to watch Women of the White Buffalo, and you can view it on YouTube TV, Apple TV, Amazon Prime, Google Play, and more. Just give it a good old Google search. Be sure to follow Deborah on her socials. I've linked them in the description of the episode, as always. And if you did like this episode, please share with friends and family. And if you feel so inclined, please rate and review wherever you listen. It really does help us out and means the world. If you like to watch, you can find it on YouTube. All of Curiosity episodes are uploaded there as well. Be sure to follow Curiosity on Instagram and TikTok at CuriosityPod, and myself at Lauren Deliri. I want to hear your thoughts, so let me know what you thought of this episode. As always, thank you for listening. Love you guys. Stay curious. And until next time, bye.